Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today we're going to make a shop stool that you can take with you. I started with a scrap of 3/4 inch plywood and made 3 marks on both ends. Now these aren't even, but I lined them up with a straight edge to get some diagonals. I remembered that adding tape would give me a cleaner cut, so I covered those lines with blue tape and then redrew the lines. I just used a circular saw to cut these pieces off, and it doesn't matter that they're not perfectly exact, they're close enough. I used a sanding block to clean up the edges and then took a 48-inch piano hinge and found the center point. I used a metal cutting bandsaw, but you could use a cutoff wheel and a grinder, and I cut this in half. I cleaned up the cut with a file. I laid the hinge out and marked where I wanted it to sit. I marked the top hole and the bottom hole and then pre-drilled and screwed those in. This keeps the whole hinge in place so I could pre-drill and screw in all the rest of the holes. It's really important that both pieces of wood and the hinge are all parallel, otherwise it won't fold correctly. So I made sure to get all of that in line and then pre-drilled and screwed it all together. After that one worked, I added another hinge to connect the third wing. Went through the same process here, pre-drilled and screwed the top and the bottom, and then pre-drilled and screwed all the rest of the holes. I used a block of wood along the bottom to make sure that all 3 wings were in line before adding the third hinge. I added the top and the bottom screws like before, but it was kind of hard to get the driver in at this angle. So I poked the rest of the holes and then added a spacer under the piece of plywood to add the rest of the screws. Then I had the hinging base for the stool. Now it's time for the top. On another scrap of plywood, I found an area where a 12-inch circle would work. Then I set my compass to 6 inches and pivoted it around the center point. I cut this out on the bandsaw, but didn't try to hit the line. I don't have a lot of control here, so instead I got it close to the line and then took it to the disc sander to sand it back to the line as I spun the piece around. I ended up with a pretty good circle. Then I used a router to add a round over to what would be the top of the seat. On the bottom of the seat, I drew a reference line from the center point out to the edge, and then I set the first leg along that line. I spun the other 2 ones out to about 1/3 of the way, and then I set my protractor to 120 degrees. I used that to line up the exact position of each one of the legs, and then mark them with a pencil. I set 2 small hinges in place, lining them up with the outside edge of one of the marks that I just made. I pre-drilled and screwed these in. These also got connected to the outside of one of the legs. I lined up the leg with the shape that I had drawn and got it in place and then marked the holes. I also couldn't get my driver into this, so I had to screw these in by hand. Once those were in, then it folded against the top of the seat. This would pretty much work as it is, but I wanted those legs to hold their position. So in the areas that I had drawn, I traced out some mending plates. I used a utility knife to cut the outside of these so that I wouldn't have any veneer problems. I used a chisel to knock out these areas. I had to do some test fitting to get it to fit flush with the surface of the plywood, but once I got both of them in place, I just screwed them in. I had some small rare earth magnets that I've had for quite a while, and I found a drill bit that was the exact same size. I figured out the depth that needed to be cut and added a flag of tape so I wouldn't drill too deep. I drilled 3 holes in the top of 2 of the legs, the ones that weren't hinged to the seat, and then I added some CA glue, pushed in the magnet, and then hammered it flush. It's really important that the magnets are flush with the surface, or maybe even proud a little bit, because if they're pushed in too far, they won't do their job. Be sure to check your tape when you're drilling these holes because it will move on the drill bit after you use it a lot. I folded out the legs to make sure that the magnets would keep them in place, and they did, just barely. It's easy to fold up and easy to unfold, and it holds your weight just fine when you're sitting on it. To finish it up, I ran over the whole thing with some sandpaper just to smooth it out, and then put on 2 or 3 coats of spray lacquer. Overall, it works pretty well. It works actually better than I expected it to. I didn't look up to see if anybody else has done this design or anything, so it may not be truly original. I'm not worried about that. I just happened to think of it in my head and thought I would give it a shot and just started building. There's a few things that I think will make it even better, and I'll tell you about those after the sponsor. You know how this works, so hang in there. The sponsor for this video is Kalo, and they make these awesome silicone wedding bands. They're awesome for people who work with their hands. They're safer, they're more comfortable, and they're resistant to all sorts of chemicals and oils and things like that you might work with in the shop. I thought I would wear mine on occasion, but now I wear it all the time. I love these things. Be sure to go check them out, kaloring.com. Okay, back to this. Like I said, there's a few things I think you could do to this to make it even better. One, you could cut down on the weight by cutting out some of these center sections. Another advantage of that is it would give you an opening on the inside that you could actually flip this thing up and hang it on the wall. And if you didn't want to cut out the section, but you still wanted to be able to hang this, you could put a hanger or something right here, drill a little hole or put a picture hanger or something like that. Then you could just set this thing up on the wall. For me, I don't really have any wall space to hang this thing, so it wasn't a big concern of mine. This is just gonna go like under a table or something when I'm not using it. The other big thing I would probably change is the magnet stuff. These magnets work okay. They do hold against these steel plates, but they're not quite as strong as I would like. So there's a couple of things you could do there to improve that. You could add more magnets. I've got enough room here. I could probably add 3 more per piece of wood, but then you could also add magnets up here instead of these steel plates. That way you have 2 magnets pulling together instead of 1 magnet pulling against steel. I'm not worried about it being unstable or anything like that. They do hold in place as it is now, but if you wanted it to really lock in, adding some more magnets to both of these sections would probably do it. The overall size of this could obviously be scaled to whatever you need. If you need a short stool or a really tall one, I actually just used a size that would fit in the scrap plywood that I had. It's probably a little short to be in the shop, but it'll work all right. And the coolest thing is that I can fold it up and stick it in the back of my truck, and it won't take up that much room. That's it for this one, guys. It's another off-the-cuff build. I love doing things that just pop into my head, and I go try them out and prototype them, and then find ways to improve them next time. If you end up making something like this, I would love to see it. You can share it with me on any of the social networks. I've got links to all that stuff down in the description. I've also got some other videos for you to check out, and don't forget to subscribe, and I have a second channel now where stuff that's not project related is gonna go. So if you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe to it too. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.